To understand why a series of major revolutions occurred in the late 18th century, we first need to examine the conditions of European society at that time, specifically what historians call the crisis of the old regime. The old regime refers to the traditional social and political system that existed in Europe before the French Revolution. By the late 18th century, this system was facing three major pressures. First, an economic crisis. Governments had accumulated large debts from wars, while poor harvests caused shortages and rising bread prices, hitting ordinary people the hardest. Second, severe social inequality. Society was divided into three estates: the clergy, the nobility, and the third estate. Although the third estate made up the vast majority of the population, they carried almost the entire tax burden, while the clergy and nobility enjoyed special privileges. Third, intellectual change. Enlightenment thinkers such as Rousseau argued that sovereignty should come from the people, not from kings. As these ideas spread, growing dissatisfaction with the old regime created the conditions for revolutionary movements. One of the earliest examples of these movements was the American Revolution, which took place between 1765 and 1783. After the 7 Years' War, Britain imposed new taxes on its American colonies, but the colonists had no representative in the British Parliament. This led to the famous slogan, "No taxation without representation." In 1776, the colonies issued the Declaration of Independence, written mainly by Thomas Jefferson, declaring that all people possess natural rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The revolution established constitutional government, popular sovereignty, and separation of powers, demonstrating that people could successfully challenge traditional authority and build a new political system based on Enlightenment principles. The influence of these revolutionary ideas continued to spread throughout Europe, but revolutionary change also brought instability and political turmoil. In this context, Napoleon Bonaparte emerged as a powerful leader. Napoleon seized power in 1799, promising to restore order after years of chaos. During his rule, he introduced several important reforms. The Napoleonic Code, which established legal equality for all citizens, a merit-based administrative system where people ruled through government based on ability rather than birth, and a more centralized government that unified France more effectively. However, there was a clear contradiction in his rule. While he preserved certain revolutionary ideals such as legal equality and administrative reform, he also limited political freedoms through censorship, authoritarian rule, and military expansion. Therefore, Napoleon can be seen as both a product of the revolution and someone who moved away from some of its original ideals. Although Napoleon's empire eventually collapsed, the ideas that emerged from this revolutionary era continued to shape Europe. People began debating what kind of society should replace the old order, leading to the rise of new ideologies and cultural movements.
Okay, let's move to the next topic. We are going to talk about the French Revolution of the 1789 and the age of ideologies that followed right after. So, let's dive in. To understand why the French Revolution happened, imagine living in the society where the rich nobles and the clergy paid basically zero taxes. while the poor peasant carried the entire financial burden of the country. Okay, on top of that, there were terrible bread shortages, and the people were literally starving. So, in 1789, the common people, known as the Touriste, decided they had enough. They broke away from their own national assembly, and angry crowds eventually stormed the Bastille prison, which was a huge symbol of the king's absolute power. This was the moment all systems began to crumble. The revolutionaries came up with a legendary slogan that you've probably heard before: liberty, equality, and fraternity or brotherhood. They wanted a world where everyone was equal under the law. But things quickly took a dark and radical turn. The revolution became chaotic, leading to the execution of the King Louis XVI and a dark period called the Reign of Terror. Under a leader named Robespierre, anyone suspected of being against the revolution was executed. It shows how quickly a fight for freedom can spiral out of control. Even though it was incredibly violent, the French Revolution completely changed the political landscape of the world. It destroyed the idea of absolute monarchies where kings ruled with a total power. Instead, it gave birth to modern citizenship and nationalism. Because of this revolution, people stopped viewing themselves as just obedient subjects of the king and started seeing themselves as citizens who actually have rights, a voice, and shared loyalty to their nation. Now, after the old real order was destroyed, a massive question came up across Europe. What kind of society should we build next? This confusion gave birth to four major political ideologies that we still argue about today. The first is liberalism. So, liberalism pushed for individual rights, civil liberties, and constitutional government. So the second is conservatism. Conservatism is favored tradition, social ability, stability, and preferred gradual change over violent revolution. The next is nationalism. So nationalism argues that people's primary loyalty should be to their nation and cultural identity. The next is socialism, was believed to fight for workers' rights and economic equality because of the harsh condition of the industrial revolution. So, basically, our modern political debate started right here. Okay, the French Revolution didn't just change France, it set off a chain reaction across Europe. It forced humanity to create new frameworks for our modern ideologies to handle rapid social change. So that's all from me. Thank you.
With me, Zolva, in the section part, I'll be taking you through one of the most fascinating movements of the 19th century, and it's called the Romanticism era. But now, I want to address something important first. And so when most people heard the word Romanticism, they most likely will think of the word romance, right? Or maybe like the love stories on a movie, candlelit dinner with their partners, and that sort of things. And honestly, that's a very understandable assumption because of the word romanticism itself. But the romanticism we're discussing today is something quite different from all of that thing, and I can say that it's far more interesting. So, Romanticism is actually a major cultural movement that reshaped how people created art, wrote literature, and then experienced nature. And then thought about the meaning of being a human. And then let's start from the beginning first. Where did Romanticism actually come from? To understand Romanticism better, we have to understand what it was pushing back or reacting against. So for about a whole century before this period, Europe had been living through something called the Enlightenment era. And then the Enlightenment era was, in many ways, actually really incredible and then extraordinary, because that era gave us modern science, constitutional thinking, and that the idea that world can be understood and improved through factual reason and careful observation through logics. So this is actually great stuff that were really happening back then. But then came the Industrial Revolution, and suddenly people were moving into big cities, working in factories for maybe more than 10 hours a day, surrounded by noise and smoke and heavy machines. So because of the increasing numbers, a lot of people found themselves doing repetitive mechanical movements because they're disconnected from nature, from their own communities, or from anything that felt meaningful from their life. Life was at that time were becoming very, very boring, very, very mechanical, and very, very cold. And then the romantics thought about what they were actually feels, and then they said to themselves, is this how life's supposed to be, or maybe is this what human life's supposed to look like? So because as a human, we are a rational being, so being alone is not our thing. So because we're a rational being, we feel things, we imagine things, we long for beauty and meanings in many ways that can be reduced to our own logic or maybe efficiency. And if our culture starts treating people as nothing more than an object, then something very, very special about human being has lost its own meaning. So this idea showed up most vividly in art and in literature. And the romantic style is quite distinctive once we know what to look for and how to look for it. So as for example, in some traumatic emotions, when we feel overwhelmed seeing landscapes and when we have a deep fascination with nature. And then in paintings, they're one of the most important figure in the Romanticism era, and he's called Caspar David Friedrich. His wonder above the sea of fog, it shows a lone figure. It's a man, I think, and he's standing on a rocky cliff, turning his back on us, and his gaze is focused on that misty valley. So I think what makes it romantic isn't just the scenery itself, but it's what Friedrich chose to paint, not something extra, but only one person, and he's alone. And it feels like he's trying to face something mysterious and unknown to himself. And then he once said, a painter should depict not only what he sees before his eyes, but what he sees within himself. So that idea alone captures the romantic spirits and feelings so beautifully. And then there's in the literature, William Blake wrote about spiritual fusion and the cause of industrialization. And then Wordsworth found profound meaning in ordinary encounters with nature. But then there's Shelley's Ozymandias. She wrote a poem about a ruined statue bearing the words, "Look on my works, ye mighty in despair." So it's a reminder that no empire lasts forever. And then in the music, there's Beethoven, and he's broke away from the normal elegance of classical composition on the music world and then replace it with something more raw, passionate, and then emotionally overwhelming to us. So that tension between the structure and the feelings in many ways actually is the essence of the romance. So now this is something that most of people often miss in Romanticism. So it wasn't only about just beauty and emotion, but many romantics were genuinely angry at the industrialization because of the emptiness that industrialization created at what the modern life was doing to a lot of ordinary people. And then I think that William Blake is the best example for that. There's this phrase that called dark satanic pills, and that wasn't just a poetic image. It was a clearly dark criticism to a system that he believed was harming people's lives. And then that anger actually led to real change. Romanticism actually helped inspire the movement. And then it inspired to end the slavery, push for the better education, and then encourage humanitarian causes across the Europe. So it was never really an escape from the world or maybe a revolution. It was a response to it.
So we've just heard about Romanticism, right? How people responded to the chaos of modernity through emotion, imagination, and also a longing for something beautiful. But not everyone responded that way. Some people maybe looked at some world and said, enough with the ideals, and let's talk about what's actually happening. And that's exactly what realism did.
To understand realism, we first need to understand the world it was born in, the Industrial Revolution. On the surface, it may look like progress, steam engines, factories, and also railroads. Cities were growing, economies were booming, but behind all of that, the reality are much darker. Workers, including children as young as 5 or 6, spend 12 to 14 hours a day operating heavy machinery for almost nothing. No safety rules, no protections, no right. Get injured, you may lose your job. Lose your job, you may starve.
Frederick Engels visited the city of Manchester in 1840s and was shocked by what he saw. Extreme wealth and extreme poverty existing just a few streets apart. That gap, that contrast, is exactly what realism wanted to put on display. So, what exactly is realism? Realism emerged in 1840s as a direct pushback against romantic idealizations where romanticism looked at the world and saw beauty and mystery. On the other hand, realism looked at the same world and said, yes, but what about the people suffering in it? It focused on the people, everyday struggles, real social conditions, no heroes, no myths, no glorified landscapes, just life as it actually was. And the simplest way to put it, if Romanticism says, imagine, realism says, look. In painting, Gustav Courbet's The Stone Breakers says it all. Two workers, an old man and a young boy, doing back-breaking work on the side of the road. Their faces are not even shown. They are not heroes. They are just exhausted. No drama, no beauty, just labor. In the literature, Charles Dickens did something similar but through storytelling.
Novels like Oliver Twist and Hard Times brought readers face to face with child labor, poverty, and the deep hypocrisy of the Victorian society. He didn't just entertain people, he made them feel uncomfortable, and that's the point, because that's what realism really about, making suffering visible, not to make people feel sad, but to make people feel responsible.
Realism didn't exist in isolation, it grew alongside bigger shift, a scientific revolution that was changing how people saw the world. Darwin's theory of evolution shook the foundations of religion and made people question everything that they thought they knew about humanity. Scientists like Pasteur and Lister were proving that the physical world could be studied, understood, and also improved. And realism and science shared the same spirit. Look closely, don't assume, represent what you actually find. Realism didn't exist in isolation, it grew alongside a bigger shift, a scientific revolution that was changing how people saw the world. And realism and science shared the same spirit. Look closely, don't assume, represent what you actually find.